This is Janus Dispatch, Architecture over Narrative, Part 2 of 6 in the State of the Republic series. Obedience in Advance. Why the Republic is not being overthrown. It is being surrendered. The tyrant has only the power that we give him. Étienne de la Boétie, Discourse on Voluntary Servitude, 1552. Most of the power of authoritarianism is freely given. Timothy Snyder, on Tyranny, 2017. The mechanism. There is a riddle at the center of every authoritarian transition that political theorists have never fully solved. It runs like this. How does one man, alone, with no army of his own, no police force loyal only to him, no personal capacity to enforce a single decision, succeed in bending an entire constitutional order to his will? The answer cannot be force. One man does not have force. The answer cannot be charisma. Charisma persuades crowds, not generals. The answer cannot be cunning. The cleverest tyrant in history could not by himself fire a single soldier without someone else carrying out the order. And the answer cannot be law, because the law is paper until someone chooses to enforce it. The answer is consent. The unspoken, unasked for, often unconscious consent of every person in the chain of command, who decides, at the moment of decision, that resistance costs more than compliance. Étienne de la Boétie wrote it down in 1552. Tyranny is not imposed, it is gifted, by thousands of small choices made quietly, in private, by people who have already decided before they have been asked to obey. This essay is the companion to Compound Ignorance. That essay described a leader who stops reading and the consequences of his withdrawal from reality. This one describes the people around him, the courtiers, the officials, the generals, the judges, the press secretaries, the senators, who choose, day by day, to bring him only what he wants to hear, to sign what he places in front of them, to defend what they would have prosecuted in another administration, to post what they would have refused to draft a year earlier. The leader is not the disease. The leader is the symptom of a system that has lost its capacity to say no. The formula. Timothy Snyder's first lesson in On Tyranny is one sentence. Do not obey in advance. The phrase is precise. It does not say resist. Resistance comes later, if at all. It says, do not obey before you are asked. Do not anticipate the autocrat's wishes. Do not perform the loyalty he has not yet demanded. Do not draft the order he has not yet signed. Do not rationalize, in advance, the compromise he has not yet requested. Because the moment a system begins to obey in advance, the autocrat learns something terrible, not about himself, about his own institutions. He learns that the institutions are not waiting for orders. They are waiting for signals, and signals are cheaper than orders. They produce the same compliance without the political cost of issuing a directive. The mathematics of obedience in advance follow a predictable curve. On day one official rewrites a memo to soften a finding. The cost is invisible. One memo, one adjective changed. The hierarchy registers nothing. On day 10 officials have rewritten 10 memos. Each rewrite was performed by someone who observed the first rewrite and noted that no consequence followed. The behavior has been modeled. It has begun to spread. On day 30, the rewriting is no longer a deviation. It is the expected practice. New hires are trained, formally or informally, to produce the softened version on the first draft. The original adjective is no longer available because no one remembers what it used to be. On day 100, the institution has lost its capacity to produce the original adjective, not from prohibition, from atrophy. The skill of writing the unwelcome truth has decayed through disuse, and the autocrat has not had to ban anything. The institution banned itself in advance on his behalf. This is the architecture of voluntary servitude that Boétie described 5 centuries ago. The autocrat is the occasion for compliance, not its cause. The cause is the network of small calculations made by individuals who, at every level, decide that the marginal cost of saying no exceeds the marginal benefit. Each individual calculation is rational. Each is, in isolation, defensible. The aggregate is catastrophe. Case Study 1. Hindenburg and Papen. We have engaged him. In January 1933, Franz von Papen, former Chancellor of the Weimar Republic, conservative aristocrat, master of the backroom negotiation, assured skeptical colleagues that the appointment of Adolf Hitler as Chancellor was a strategic masterstroke. The conservatives would contain him. Within months, they expected, the corner would close and the man would be made harmless. The plan was elegant on paper. The conservative establishment, the Junkers, the industrialists, the army, the Catholic Centre Party, would form a cabinet around Hitler. They would hold the key portfolios: defense, foreign affairs, economics, justice. Hitler would be the chancellor. They would be the government. He would deliver the votes. They would deliver the policy. He would speak. They would govern. Hindenburg, 85 years old and increasingly removed from daily affairs, signed the appointment on January 30th, 1933. He believed Papen and the cabinet. He believed the constitutional architecture would constrain a man whom he privately called that Bohemian corporal. Within 8 weeks, the Reichstag had passed the Enabling Act, transferring legislative power to Hitler's cabinet. Within 6 months, the trade unions, the political parties, the regional governments, the press and the judiciary had all been brought into line. Gleichschaltung, the synchronization of every institution to a single will. Papen was not pushed into a corner. He was pushed out of office. By August 1934, Hindenburg was dead, and Hitler had merged the chancellorship and the presidency. The constitutional architecture, the thing the conservatives had trusted to constrain the man they had appointed, had ceased to exist. Hitler did not destroy it. The conservatives, the judges, the generals, the bureaucrats, and the industrialists had, in advance, brought it to him. The compound calculation was rational at every step. The judge who upheld the Reichstag fire decree was protecting his career. The general who took the new oath of personal loyalty in 1934 was protecting his command. The industrialist who funded the campaign was protecting his factories. The civil servant who signed the racial purity questionnaire was protecting his pension. Each individual calculation, taken alone, was defensible. The aggregate was the Third Reich. Case Study 2. Vichy France. The speed of capitulation. When France fell in June 1940, what struck contemporary observers was not the military defeat. Defeats happen. What struck them was the speed of the institutional adjustment. Within 10 weeks of the armistice, Marshal Philippe Pétain, hero of Verdun, 84 years old, summoned to power as a national savior, had suspended the Third Republic Constitution, granted himself full legislative, executive, and judicial powers by a vote of the National Assembly, 569 in favor, 80 against, 20 abstentions. Replaced the Republican motto, liberté, égalité, fraternité with travail, famille, patrie, and issued the first Statut des Juifs, defining Jewishness in racial terms and excluding Jews from the civil service, the army, the press, and education. None of this was demanded by the Germans. The German occupation forces had not yet arrived in many of the affected regions. The collaboration was anticipatory. Pétain's government decided what the occupiers would want and provided it before being asked. The 569 deputies who voted for the suspension of the Republic were not coerced. Many were socialists, many were center-left. They voted for the man, not the policy. They voted because the alternative, refusing, felt, in the moment, more dangerous than acceding. The French civil service did not require purges. It restaffed itself. Prefects who had served the Republic on Friday served the Vichy regime on Monday. The same files, the same procedures, the same signatures, the same desks. The only thing that had changed was the letterhead. The judiciary did not need to be threatened. It convened tribunals, applied the new statutes, sentenced political opponents, and confiscated Jewish property under the same legal procedures it had used the week before. The forms were identical. Only the content had been adjusted. This is the lesson that France took decades to confront. The occupation did not bring fascism. France brought fascism in advance to anticipate the occupation. The Germans did not have enough personnel to administer France. They did not need to. France administered itself, on terms more punitive than the occupiers initially required, executed by Frenchmen who had served the Republic the day before and would serve the Fourth Republic the day after, without, in most cases, any change in personnel, salary, or pension. The compound calculation, again. Each individual official decided, at every desk, that compliance was less risky than resistance. Each calculation was correct. The aggregate was a regime that deported 76,000 Jews to Auschwitz, 75,000 of whom did not return. Case Study 3. The Moscow Show Trials. I am guilty. In March 1938, Nikolai Bukharin, Lenin's darling of the party, the most prominent old Bolshevik still alive, the man Stalin had personally dined with for 15 years, stood in the dock at the Trade Union House in Moscow and confessed to crimes he had not committed. He confessed to plotting the assassination of Lenin in 1918. He confessed to working for years as an agent of British and German intelligence. He confessed to industrial sabotage. He confessed to a Trotskyist conspiracy to poison Stalin. The confessions were detailed, internally consistent, and entirely fabricated. Why did he confess? Western observers at the time, Lion Feuchtwanger, Joseph Davies, concluded the confessions must be genuine, because no innocent person would confess to capital crimes in open court. They were wrong. Bukharin confessed because the alternative was worse. His wife and infant son had been arrested. He had been told, explicitly, that confession was their only hope. He confessed to save them. They were imprisoned and exiled regardless. Bukharin was shot, but the deeper mechanism was not personal. It was systemic. By 1938, every party member who refused to confess had been shot. Every party member who defended a colleague had been shot. Every party member who hesitated had been shot. Every party member who merely asked for clarification had been shot. The system had optimized over 5 years for a single output: confession. Stalin did not have to extract confessions from each individual. The system extracted them. Each party member, observing the fate of those who had refused, calculated correctly that confession was the dominant strategy. Resistance had no upside. Confession had a marginal chance of mercy. Most chose confession. The structural point is what makes this case relevant beyond Soviet history. The system Stalin built relied not on Stalin's personal effort, but on the cumulative, preemptive obedience of every party member, every NKVD officer, every prosecutor, every prison guard. Each performed his function not because Stalin had personally instructed him, but because he had observed what happened to those who did not. The terror was self-administering. Stalin's role was to maintain the conditions under which obedience in advance remained the rational choice. The party did the rest. Case Study 4, Berlusconi, the 20-year normalization. The Italian case is the slow-motion version. No coup, no constitutional rupture, no Reichstag fire, just 2 decades of incremental normalization that by the end had reshaped Italian democracy without anyone deciding on any particular day to abandon it. Silvio Berlusconi was elected Prime Minister in 1994. He owned 3 of the 4 major commercial television networks. He owned the largest publishing house. He owned the most watched football club. He owned a major bank. None of these was divested. The conflict of interest was technically illegal under Italian law. The law was technically never enforced. The mechanism, every official charged with enforcement, made the calculation that enforcement was politically suicidal. The judges who attempted to prosecute Berlusconi for tax fraud, for bribery, for false accounting, for embezzlement, were attacked by name on the networks Berlusconi owned. The prosecutors who pursued his cases found themselves the subject of investigative journalism conducted by his own outlets. The civil servants who drafted the conflict of interest legislation found their careers stalled. Each individual official could have insisted. Most did not. Each individual journalist could have refused to soften. Most did not. Each individual judge could have applied the law. Most found procedural reasons to delay. By 2010, Italian democracy had not collapsed. Italy still held elections. It still seated a parliament and a constitutional court. But the operational meaning of those institutions had been hollowed out. The press had learned to self-censor. The judiciary had learned to delay. The bureaucracy had learned to look the other way. And the electorate, the critical innovation, had learned to find all of it acceptable. The Berlusconi case is the warning that authoritarian collapse is not the only failure mode. A democracy can also fail by staying alive while losing its functions. The forms remain. The substance has been removed, and no single day can be identified as the day the democracy ended, because every individual choice that contributed to the hollowing was in isolation defensible. This is the model that should worry American observers most. Not the dramatic rupture of 1933, not the rapid capitulation of 1940, not the public theater of 1938, the slow 20-year normalization that produces a regime no one chose, sustained by institutions no one defends, accepted by citizens who can no longer remember what the alternative looked like. The counter case, Margaret Chase Smith, Declaration of Conscience, 1950. On June 1, 1950, Senator Margaret Chase Smith of Maine, the only woman in the United States Senate, a Republican, 2 years into her first term, rose on the Senate floor and delivered a 15-minute speech. She did not name Joseph McCarthy. She did not need to. Every senator in the chamber knew whom she meant. I do not want to see the Republican Party ride to political victory on the 4 horsemen of calumny, fear, ignorance, bigotry, and smear. I do not like the way the Senate has been made a rendezvous for vilification, for selfish political gain at the sacrifice of individual reputations and national unity. I am not proud of the way we smear outsiders from the floor of the Senate and hide behind the cloak of congressional immunity. She was joined that day by 6 Republican senators, 6 out of 42. The rest of her party, including the leadership, declined to associate themselves with the statement. McCarthy, who had been on the Senate floor when she rose, walked out before she finished. He later referred to her and her 6 colleagues as Snow White and the 6 Dwarfs. The Declaration of Conscience did not stop McCarthy. He continued his campaign for another 4 years, ruining hundreds of careers and lives, before finally being censured by the Senate in 1954. And the Senate that censured him did so for procedural reasons, not for the substance of his accusations. Why does Margaret Chase Smith matter if she failed? She matters because she demonstrated that silence was a choice. Every Republican senator who did not stand up that day made an active decision not to. They could not later claim they had not known. They could not claim they had not been given the opportunity. The opportunity was a 15-minute speech on the Senate floor by their colleague. They watched it. They declined to join. This is the function of the dissenting voice in a system sliding toward complicity. It does not usually stop the slide. The slide has too much momentum. What the dissenting voice does is refuse to let silence be misread as consent. It establishes, on the record, that an alternative existed, that the compliance of others was not inevitable, that history will record names. Smith's speech was preserved. It is read in high schools. The names of the 6 who joined her are remembered. The names of the 36 who did not are mostly forgotten, except by historians who study the period and find, in the silence of those names, the more important record. A democracy does not require everyone to speak. It requires that someone speak, and that the silence of the rest be visible. Case Study 5. The Contemporary Pattern under Trump. By mid-May 2026, the documentation is no longer cryptic. The pattern can be itemized in 2 registers, material and institutional. Begin with the material inventory. As of May 2026, the president's name or image had been placed on the following: U.S. passports, a redesigned passport with Trump's portrait and signature superimposed over the Declaration of Independence, announced by the State Department on April 28, 2026, to be issued from summer 2026. National Park Passes, the 2026 America the Beautiful annual pass, replacing the contest-winning Glacier National Park photograph with side-by-side portraits of Trump and George Washington. The Department of the Interior announced the redesign in November 2025. The Center for Biological Diversity filed suit in December 2025, alleging violation of the Federal Lands Recreation Enhancement Act of 2004. Trump Gold Card, a residency by investment program operated through trumpcard.gov, requiring a $1 million federal gift for individuals or $2 million per employee for corporate sponsors. Launched December 11, 2025, bears Trump's portrait, signature, and the Statue of Liberty alongside a bald eagle on the card design. Trump-class battleships, a proposed class of large surface combatants announced by Trump and the Department of the Navy on December 22, 2025, with the Navy seeking $17 billion for the lead ship in the fiscal year 2028 budget. The class is the first in U.S. history to be named after a sitting president. The Trump Kennedy Center, the John F. Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts, was renamed the Donald J. Trump and the John F. Kennedy Memorial Center for the Performing Arts by unanimous vote of the Trump-appointed board on December 18, 2025. New signage was installed the following day. Congress designated the Kennedy Center as a memorial to John F. Kennedy by statute in 1964. Lawsuits challenging the renaming are pending. TrumpR-X.gov, a federal website launched on February 5, 2026, directing patients to discounted direct-to-consumer drug purchases from pharmaceutical companies that have signed pricing deals with the administration. The president's signature on U.S. paper currency, announced by the Treasury Department on March 26, 2026. This is the first time in U.S. history that a sitting president's signature will appear on circulating paper currency, which by tradition has carried only the signatures of the Treasury Secretary and the Treasurer. Commemorative gold coins, a 24-carat commemorative coin, bearing Trump's likeness, approved unanimously on March 19, 2026, by the Commission of Fine Arts, whose members were appointed by Trump in 2025. The Mint is also developing a $1 coin with Trump's image. Federal law, the Thayer Amendment of 1866, prohibits the depiction of a living individual on U.S. currency. The administration argues the commemorative coin sidesteps this prohibition because it is not for general circulation. The Donald J. Trump Institute of Peace, the United States Institute of Peace, an independent agency created by Congress in 1984, was renamed by the State Department on December 3, 2025, with new exterior signage installed at the Foggy Bottom headquarters. The institute had been administratively dismantled earlier in 2025. Legal challenges to the takeover and renaming are ongoing. Banners on federal department buildings, large banners bearing Trump's portrait, have been installed on the facades of the Department of Justice, February 19, 2026, with the slogan, "Make America Safe Again." The Department of Labor, paired with Theodore Roosevelt, slogan, "American Workers First," and the Department of Agriculture, paired with Abraham Lincoln, slogan, "Growing America Since 1862." Trump accounts, federally seeded investment accounts created under the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, signed July 4, 2025. Each American child born between 2025 and 2028 receives an initial $1,000 federal deposit. The accounts are administered by the IRS at the IRS Trump Accounts page. The Strait of Trump map. On April 29, 2026, the official Trump account on Truth Social retruthed a graphic labeling the Strait of Hormuz as the Strait of Trump and the Eastern Persian Gulf as the Gulf of Trump. The post received 8,500 likes within hours. No State Department clarification was issued. No retraction was demanded. The map remained live. Following the February 2025 executive order renaming the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of America, this represents the second-stage escalation of the renaming logic, from nation as owner of geography to person as owner of geography. The Strait of Hormuz, named for the medieval island and trading city, has carried that name in international cartography since the 14th century. Its renaming was not affected by treaty, executive order, or congressional act. It was affected by a retruth, 14 domains, one name. The Republican tradition is explicit on this point. Living presidents do not appear on currency. Departments are named for functions, not persons. National monuments commemorate the dead, not the incumbent. The Lincoln Cent appeared in 1909, 44 years after the assassination. The Roosevelt dime appeared in 1946, 1 year after his death. The rule was not aesthetic, it was structural. State symbolism belongs to the office, not the office holder. The distinction between the two is the entire premise of a republic. The rule survived 235 years. It did not survive the second term. Each individual placement was approved by a designated official, a Treasury employee, a Park Service director, a Defense Department procurement officer, a Justice Department spokesman, a department head, somewhere along a chain of signatures. None of these officials was constitutionally required to refuse. Each was constitutionally capable of refusal. The distinction is the entire content of this essay. The capacity for refusal exists on paper. The practice of refusal has been abandoned. The material inventory is the visible layer. The institutional inventory is the operational one. The Attorney General was dismissed before her scheduled testimony in the Epstein matter. No senator filibustered the replacement. The replacement was confirmed. 12 generals were dismissed in a single day, including officers who had publicly expressed reservations about the legality of the Iran campaign. No flag officer resigned in protest. No service chief publicly objected. The remaining generals saluted. The Supreme Court declined to hear constitutional challenges to executive orders concerning the war power, deferring on procedural grounds. No justice issued a public dissent on the procedural choice itself. The challenges were silently extinguished. Congress passed supplemental funding for an undeclared war by margins that included most of the opposition party. No senator forced a roll call vote on the authorization for use of military force. No representative invoked the War Powers Resolution. The Treasury Secretary publicly stated that Chinese vessels would no longer transit the Strait of Hormuz with Iranian oil. On the same day, a Chinese-flagged tanker completed such a transit. The Treasury Secretary was not corrected. The Treasury Department issued no clarification. The Press Secretary did not address the contradiction. The Defense Secretary publicly endorsed a Truth Social post containing instructions for a maritime interdiction operation. The endorsement was reposted by the official Defense Department account. On April 27, 2026, the new federal identification card was rolled out. The President's portrait was printed over the text of the United States Constitution. No constitutional officer publicly objected. On April 28, 2026, the official White House account posted a photograph of the President with King Charles III, captioned, "Two Kings with a crown emoji." The post was not removed. No press secretary resigned. No member of the cabinet issued a clarification. The post remains live. On May 5, 2026, the Secretary of State told reporters that if hundreds of countries cannot rally behind that, then I don't know what the utility of the UN system is. No one asked the man appointed to represent the United States at that institution to muse aloud about its uselessness. He did it unprompted. On April 29, 2026, the Treasury Secretary went on television and called the outgoing Federal Reserve Chair's decision to remain on the board as a governor a violation of all Federal Reserve norms, framing it as an insult to the President's own nominees. He was not instructed to attack the chair by name. He volunteered it, amplifying a posture the President had already signaled. On April 8, 2026, at a Pentagon briefing, the Secretary of War called the Iran campaign Operation Epic Fury, a historic and overwhelming victory on the battlefield, a capital 5 military victory. declared that Iran begged for this ceasefire and credited the outcome to the president. President Trump forged this moment. No one required him to supply the superlative or the attribution. He brought both. On May 8, 2026, the State Department's official social account posted a graphic rendering of the Secretary of State's own words. "Only stupid countries don't shoot back when you're shot at, and we're not a stupid country." Set over footage of him, in the visual grammar of a promotional clip. No official declined to publish it. This is the inventory. It is not interpretation. Each item is independently verifiable. Each occurred without resistance from the institution charged with offering resistance. Each has been brought in advance by the very people who took the oaths that should have prevented it. The constitutional architecture is intact. The buildings still stand. The chambers still convene. The robes are still worn. The oaths are still recited. But the operational meaning of every institution in the chain has been adjusted to anticipate the executive's wishes before they are expressed. Boétie's mechanism, executed in real time with the participation of officials who would, if asked, deny that any of this is happening. Case Study 6. The Suit with No Defendant. In January 2026, the President of the United States sued the Internal Revenue Service. The claim that the agency had failed to prevent the 2019 to 2020 leak of his tax information by a contractor and owed him, by the figure in his own filing, at least $10 billion. The defendant was an agency of the executive branch. The plaintiff was the head of it. The case was, on its face, the government suing itself, with the same man on both sides of the caption. The career lawyers in the IRS Office of Chief Counsel did their job. Following the agency's standard procedure for answering a lawsuit, they wrote a 25-page memorandum laying out the flaws in the president's suit and recommending that the Justice Department move to dismiss it. They had grounds. The suit appeared to have been filed too late. The 2-year window had arguably opened in October 2023, when the president's own lawyer attended the guilty plea of the contractor who leaked the data, more than 2 years before the complaint. And the government held a defense it had already used against identical suits, that the IRS could not be liable for a contractor employed by a private firm. The capacity for refusal existed. It was 25 pages long. It reached Treasury officials in April. It was never used. No lawyer from the Justice Department appeared in court to contest the suit, to raise the statute of limitations, to invoke the contractor defense, or to dispute a single one of the president's claims. The defense existed on paper and was abandoned in practice. It is the exact pattern this essay has traced across 4 centuries, now compressed into a single federal case over 4 months. The reason was not an order. It was a signal. Government lawyers had already been bound by an earlier executive order to the president's view of the law. They did not have to be told to stand down against him. They anticipated it. And the anticipation was so complete that Judge Kathleen M. Williams of the Southern District of Florida had to ask the question from the bench: were the two sides actually opposed, or were the plaintiff and the defendant, in fact, on the same side? Collusion of that kind would have forced her to dismiss the case herself. She never received the answer. On Monday, May 18th, the president withdrew the suit. The same day, the Justice Department unveiled what it had built in place of a defense: a $1.776 billion anti-weaponization fund for those who claim the federal government wrongly targeted them. The figure was not rounded. It was chosen, 1776, the year of the founding, rendered as the price of retiring a lawsuit the government had declined to fight. The fund can be used to pay the president's political allies, potentially including people convicted and later pardoned for storming the Capitol on January 6, 2021. The acting Attorney General signed the order creating the fund on May 19th. The next day, the agreement was widened. The IRS would drop any audit of the president, his family, and his businesses. By a 2024 New York Times analysis, a loss in such an audit could have cost him more than $100 million. The agreement was signed on the agency's behalf by a man running the IRS who had never been confirmed to the role. The $1.776 billion will be dispersed under 5 commissioners the Attorney General appoints, and the President can dismiss at will. And one official refused. Brian Morrissey, the Treasury Department's general counsel and himself a Trump appointee, resigned that Monday, soon after the fund was created. He brought nothing. His resignation did not stop the fund or reverse the settlement. It did what Margaret Chase Smith's speech did 76 years earlier. It put on the record that an alternative existed, that the compliance of the others was a choice, and that silence was not the only response available to a person inside the building. The IRS lawyers wrote the memo. The Justice Department declined to file it. One general counsel resigned rather than administer the result. 3 points on the same curve: the capacity for refusal, the abandonment of the practice, and the single act of dissent that proves the abandonment was not inevitable. The thesis is falsifiable, and the test has a date attached. Strike the $1.776 billion fund in federal court, then watch the Justice Department. If it complies without a purge, if the officials who declined to defend the suit keep their posts after a court undoes their work, then the obedience traced here was incidental rather than structural, and the model fails. Until institutional resistance holds somewhere in the chain and goes unpunished, the mechanism stands. Why power does not need to take what is offered. The deepest insight in Boétie's Discourse is its inversion of the standard model of tyranny. The standard model, the tyrant takes power against the resistance of the institutions until the institutions break. This is the model in popular imagination: the tyrant as conqueror, the institutions as walls. Boétie's model: the tyrant receives power, brought by the institutions, until they have given everything they have to give. This is the model in the historical record: the tyrant as recipient, the institutions as porters. In the first model, the question is whether the institutions will hold. In the second, the question is whether the institutions will stop bringing. Every case in this essay confirms the second model. Hitler did not break Weimar. Weimar was delivered to him by the men who had built it. Pétain did not destroy the Third Republic. The Third Republic dissolved itself into Vichy under the supervision of its own deputies. Stalin did not crush the old Bolsheviks. The old Bolsheviks confessed to crimes they had not committed, in part to save families, in part because the system they had built had no operational space for refusal. Berlusconi did not abolish Italian democracy. Italian democracy adapted itself to Berlusconi, day by day, until adaptation had become the institutional norm. In each case, the autocrat's contribution was signaling, making it clear what behavior would be rewarded, what behavior would be punished. The mass of compliance, the actual operational work of compliance, was performed by individuals who, observing the signals, calculated their own responses. The autocrat's job in this model is not to seize, it is to receive. and the only way to interrupt the model is for individuals, somewhere in the chain, to decline to bring. The Attorney General who refuses to fire the prosecutor, the general who refuses the illegal order, the senator who refuses to fund the war, the justice who refuses to bend the precedent, the press secretary who refuses to post 2 kings, the Treasury Counsel who resigns rather than administer the fund. Each refusal is small. Each refusal is individually dismissible. The autocrat does not need every refusal to fail. He needs the chain of compliance to remain unbroken. A single refusal, well placed, can interrupt the chain. Not stop it, interrupt it. Force the autocrat to decide whether to expend political capital on overcoming the obstacle, to root around it, or to retreat. Each refusal raises the cost. Each refusal slows the curve. The chain is interrupted in history not by mass movements, but by individuals, at desks, in chambers, in offices, who decide on a particular day that they will not bring. The choice. Every official in the chain faces the same choice every day. Sign or don't sign. Salute or don't salute. Post or don't post. Soften or don't soften. Anticipate or don't anticipate. The choice seems small on any given day. 1 memo, 1 order, 1 salute, 1 tweet. The cost of compliance is invisible. The cost of refusal is real. Career, salary, social standing, the unpleasant sensation of being the only one standing while others sit. But the choice compounds in both directions. Margaret Chase Smith's refusal compounded into a constitutional precedent that 76 years later is still cited by Americans who want to know what dissent looks like inside an institution under pressure. 6 senators stood with her. Most did not. The names of the 6 are remembered. The names of the rest are mostly not. The judges of Vichy compounded their compliance into the deportation of 76,000 people. Each individual judge, asked individually, would have insisted he was simply doing his job. Each was, in a narrow sense, correct. The aggregate was Auschwitz. The individual responsibility, in the eyes of post-war courts, was real but distributed. Too distributed to result in mass prosecutions. Too clear to result in moral acquittal. The choice is not between heroism and cowardice. Most of the people in this essay were neither heroes nor cowards. They were officials, doing their jobs, making rational calculations about marginal costs and marginal benefits. The mechanism does not require villains. It requires only that the rational individual calculation, performed by every member of the chain, produce an aggregate that no individual would have chosen on its own. This is the meaning of voluntary servitude, as Boétie described it. Not voluntary in the sense that anyone chose tyranny. Voluntary in the sense that no one was forced, at any individual moment of decision, to choose otherwise. The choice was always available. The choice was almost never made. Epilogue. The Republic is a verb. A republic is not a state. It is a practice. It does not exist in a constitution, or in a building, or in a flag, or in an oath of office. It exists in the daily, repeated, sometimes tedious refusal of individuals at every level of the chain to bring more than is asked, to sign only what they would defend in public, to prosecute equally, to certify honestly, to resign rather than execute an order they cannot justify. The Republic is what those individuals do. When they stop doing it, it stops existing, regardless of whether the Constitution still occupies a glass case in the National Archives. The case studies in this essay span 4 centuries and 4 continents. The mechanism is identical in each. Boétie identified it in 1552. Snyder reformulated it in 2017. The forms change. The architecture is constant. Tyranny is constructed daily by the obedience in advance of officials who have not yet been asked to obey. The Republic is reconstructed daily by the dissent in advance of officials who have not yet been asked to dissent. Margaret Chase Smith was not summoned to her speech. McCarthy did not invite her. She walked onto the floor and spoke without being asked. That is the operational definition of a republic, the willingness of individuals to act against the silence before they have been required to. In May 2026, the operational definition is being tested. Each item in the contemporary inventory is an opportunity that was passed up. Each silence is a choice. Each post not removed, each salute given, each memo softened, each prosecution delayed. Each is, in itself, small. Together, they constitute the system bringing what was not asked. The Constitution still exists. The architecture still stands. The vocabulary of the Republic, the daily practice of saying no before being asked to say yes, is what is being abandoned. And the only people who can restore it are the people who abandoned it. The officials, the judges, the senators, the generals, the press secretaries, who every morning decide once again to bring. They could decide otherwise. The choice remains available every day in both directions. And the choice compounds for the autocrat as well. The man who attaches his name to a strait, a department, a passport, a child's investment account, a battleship not yet built, has bound his reputation to outcomes he cannot control. The Strait of Hormuz cannot be commanded by a retruth. The empire whose currency he signs is the empire whose decline he will sign. Branding is not only a tool of the autocrat, it is also a noose he ties himself. It compounds in both directions. That was Janus Dispatch. Sources, charts, and disclosure are in the published post. Next in the State of the Republic series turns to the one institution still imagined as a backstop, the courts. It asks why a judiciary that has already deferred cannot later reverse itself. The door only opens one way. If this dispatch sharpened your read, subscribe so the next one lands in your inbox. Janus Dispatch is at janusthewatcher.substack.com. The long arguments are in the books. The transition sequence, 2 volumes, 1 thesis. The ground is shifting. Book 1, The Proto-Post-National Age. Book 2, The Frame. Available on Amazon, paperback, and Kindle. The dispatches connect. The books carry the weight. Architecture over narrative.